Sophia sat in the quiet cafe, her eyes fixed on the cracked mug in her hands. The cafe was nearly empty now, save for a few lingering customers finishing their drinks. The warm, golden glow from the lights above cast soft shadows across the wooden counter, but Sophia couldn't focus on the peaceful atmosphere. Her mind was elsewhere. At 27, Sophia was the manager of Brood Awakening, one of the most popular cafes in the city. Her business was thriving, her staff was loyal, and the customers always seemed to love the place. From the outside, it looked like she had it all: success, independence, everything she'd worked for. But inside, Sophia felt lost. She had been feeling this way for months now. She was exhausted, disconnected, and unsure of what she really wanted. The cafe, which used to be her passion, now felt like a heavy weight on her shoulders. The mug she held had been with her since college, a small, chipped ceramic cup that she used to drink her coffee every morning. It was more than just a cup. It had been a symbol of her journey. But today, it felt like a reminder of her life falling apart. As she reached for it on the counter, it slipped from her hand and shattered across the floor. Sophia stared at the broken pieces, her heart sinking. She bent down to pick them up, but something inside her told her to stop. She didn't need to fix it. Not this time. The thought was almost foreign. Sophia had always been the type to fix things, to make everything right, no matter how broken. But this time, something was different. Maybe it was time to stop fixing everything. Just then, the sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. James, a regular customer at the cafe, stepped into the room. He was in his 40s, with a calm presence that seemed to settle the air around him. Sophie always admired how peaceful he was, how he didn't rush through life the way others did. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sophia nodded, forcing a smile. "Just dropped my favorite mug." James glanced down at the pieces of the mug on the floor. "You know," he said, "sometimes things break for a reason." Sophia stared at him, unsure of what he meant. "Maybe it's not about fixing everything," James continued. "Maybe it's about accepting things as they are, imperfections and all." The next morning, Sophie couldn't stop thinking about James's words. Maybe it's not about fixing everything. She sat at her desk in the back office, staring at the shattered pieces of the mug on the counter. It felt strange, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the usual pressure to fix the mess. As she looked at the cracked mug, memories of college flooded her mind. She had always been a dreamer, full of hope and ambition. Back then, she was the girl who believed she could change the world. But now, at 27, all she felt was exhaustion. The cafe was thriving, but she wasn't sure if it was even what she wanted anymore. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the cafe door opening. Emily, her best friend, walked in with her usual energy, as if she had no worries in the world. Emily was everything Sophie used to be: carefree, optimistic, and always surrounded by people. "Hey, how's it going?" Emily asked, grinning as she hopped onto a stool by the counter. Sophie gave a half smile. "Same old, busy as ever." Emily raised an eyebrow. "I can see that, but you don't seem, well, yourself." You've been acting a little off lately. Everything okay? Sophie hesitated. She wanted to tell Emily everything, but she wasn't sure how. I don't know, she said, her voice quieter than usual. I've been feeling like something's missing. I don't know what it is. Emily leaned forward, her face serious now. Sophie, you're running a successful business. You've built this place from the ground up. What could possibly be missing? Sophie looked down at her hands, the weight of the conversation heavy in the air. I don't feel fulfilled anymore. I feel stuck. Emily sat back, clearly taken aback. She wasn't used to seeing Sophie like this. But everything looks perfect from the outside. You've got it all. Why are you questioning it? Sophie let out a small laugh. I don't know. I guess I just feel like I don't know who I am anymore. It's like I've been living for everyone else, but I've forgotten about myself. Emily didn't say anything for a moment. Then she smiled, trying to lighten the mood. Well, maybe it's time to take a break. You know, go out and enjoy yourself. You're allowed to have fun too, you know. Sophie nodded, though she didn't feel convinced. She appreciated Emily's optimism, but it felt like something deeper was missing. Later that evening, after Emily had left, Sophie went home and sat alone in her living room. She stared at the broken mug on the shelf and realized that James's words had stayed with her. Maybe she didn't need to fix everything. Maybe it was time to stop living in a constant state of perfection and start accepting the messiness of life. It was a scary thought, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like failure. It felt like the beginning of something new. The next few days passed in a blur. Sophie couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with James. The idea of accepting the cracks in her life, instead of trying to fix everything, kept echoing in her mind. But acceptance didn't come easily. Every time she tried to take a step back, the pressure of her cafe and responsibilities pushed her forward again. One morning, while standing behind the counter, Sophie watched a young woman take a sip of her coffee. The woman smiled as the warmth spread through her, eyes closing briefly as she savored the moment. Sophie felt a pang of envy. When was the last time she had enjoyed a simple moment like that? Her thoughts were interrupted when one of her employees, Lily, approached with a stack of napkins. Hey, Sophie, do you need anything else for today? There's that new customer group coming in soon. Sophie glanced at the schedule, her mind still on the lesson she was trying to learn. No, I think everything's set. Thanks, Lily. As Lily walked away, Sophie realized how disconnected she had become from the things that used to bring her joy. She wasn't just tired of the cafe. She was tired of the constant striving for something that wasn't even clear anymore. That evening, Sophie went home and sat in front of her laptop. But instead of checking emails or managing the cafe's finances, she opened up an old sketchbook she had kept since college. It was full of ideas, designs, and notes, things she had once been passionate about. One of the first pages she turned to was an old sketch of a cafe design. It was her dream project from years ago. She remembered how excited she had been to make that vision come alive. Back then, the cafe had been about more than just coffee. It had been a place for people to gather, to connect, and to experience something special. But now, it felt like a business she had to maintain rather than something she loved. The spark of creativity had faded over time. Sophie closed the sketchbook with a sigh. Maybe acceptance wasn't just about accepting the flaws in herself, but accepting that change was necessary. Maybe it was time to rethink everything, not just her cafe, but her entire life. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured herself a cup of coffee from the broken mug she had kept. As she sat down to sip it, she felt an unexpected sense of calm. It was okay to be imperfect. It was okay to redefine what success meant. Maybe it was time to stop chasing the idea of perfection and start embracing what was real. The next morning, Sophie woke up earlier than usual. For the first time in a while, she felt something different, a sense of clarity. It wasn't that all of her problems had magically disappeared, but she was starting to see things in a new light. At the cafe, she approached the day with a calmer energy. Lily, her employee, noticed the change immediately. "Hey, Sophie, you're different today," Lily remarked, handing her the register keys. "You look like you're finally taking a breath." Sophie smiled, feeling lighter. "Maybe I am." As the day went on, Sophie made small changes in how she interacted with the customers. Instead of rushing to check off tasks and constantly manage the staff, she took the time to listen, really listen, to what her customers were saying. It wasn't just about serving coffee. It was about connection. She began to realize how much she had been focusing on the wrong things. Success wasn't just about getting more customers through the door or increasing profits. It was about creating a space where people felt comfortable, happy, and at ease. And for the first time, Sophie felt like she was actually doing that. That afternoon, as Sophie sat in her usual spot behind the counter, a familiar face walked in. It was James, the regular customer who had made her think twice about fixing everything. "Mind if I sit here?" James asked with a smile, his usual calmness radiating. Sophie gestured to the empty chair. "Of course. I'm just having a coffee break." James raised an eyebrow. "Seems like you're actually taking a real break for once." Sophie chuckled. "Yeah, I think I'm learning how to." James took a sip of his coffee, then looked at her. "You know, it's funny. Sometimes we don't realize we're burning ourselves out until something breaks. Like that mug." Sophie nodded, her eyes on the cracked mug she had kept behind the counter. "I think it needed to break," she said quietly. "I needed to stop pretending I could hold everything together." James smiled. "Sometimes, the most important thing you can do is let go of control. Let the cracks show. Let the imperfections be part of your story." Sophie looked at him, a thought forming in her mind. What if the cracks aren't the end of the story? "They're just the beginning," James said with a wink. A few weeks passed since Sophie's conversation with James, and things were slowly beginning to shift. The changes in her approach to both life and the cafe were subtle but undeniable. She didn't feel the overwhelming weight of trying to keep everything perfect anymore. The pressure was lifting, little by little. One afternoon, as Sophie was preparing for the evening rush, she caught a glimpse of the old mug behind the counter. It had been repaired with a simple band of tape, a quiet reminder of her decision to stop fixing everything. It no longer felt like a broken object. It felt like a symbol of growth and acceptance. As the cafe filled with customers, Sophie took a step back and watched the interactions happening around her. She noticed how her team had become more relaxed, more engaged with the customers. Her employees weren't just working to meet the next deadline. They were enjoying their work, creating a more welcoming environment. The cafe wasn't just a business anymore. It was a place for people to connect, for people to feel at home. Later that day, Lily, the newest hire, approached Sophie with a suggestion. "Hey, I've been thinking," Lily started. "Maybe we should start a weekly event, like a book club or an open mic night. I think it could bring in more people and give the cafe a different vibe." Sophie smiled, surprised by the idea. It was something she would have dismissed a month ago. She would have worried about the logistics, the potential costs, and the risk. But now, the idea felt refreshing. "I think that's a great idea," Sophie said. "Let's start small and see where it goes." That evening, as Sophie closed the cafe, she felt a deep sense of peace. The idea of perfection no longer had a hold on her. She wasn't afraid to make mistakes, to let things unfold at their own pace. The cafe was still thriving, but in a way that felt authentic. And Sophie, for the first time in a long while, felt like she was truly living her life, not someone else's version of it. It had been a month since Sophie started embracing the imperfections in her life. The weekly events at the cafe were a hit. Book clubs, open mic nights, and even casual movie screenings. The cafe had transformed into a vibrant community hub, a place where people didn't just come for coffee, but for connection. Sophie stood behind the counter, looking around at the lively crowd. Her employees were smiling, engaging with customers, and genuinely enjoying their work. The old mug was still there, taped together, but standing proudly on the counter. It had become a symbol, not just for the cafe, but for Sophie's journey. One evening, as the last customers were leaving, James walked in. Sophie smiled at him as he sat at his usual spot by the window. "You're looking a lot better," James remarked, noticing how much more relaxed she seemed. Sophie laughed softly. "I think I've finally figured out that I don't need to fix everything. I don't need to be perfect." James nodded. "It's amazing how much weight lifts off when we stop trying to carry the whole world on our shoulders." Sophie leaned on the counter, her smile wide. "I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but I'm actually happy. For the first time in a long while, I'm okay with things not being perfect." James raised his coffee cup in a quiet toast. To imperfections, then. To letting life happen as it's meant to. Sophie clinked her mug against his, feeling a wave of gratitude. She had come so far, and the journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time, Sophie didn't feel like she had to fix everything. She could just live it, with all its cracks and flaws, and still find meaning. As Sophie watched the last few customers leave, she realized something. It wasn't about making everything perfect. It was about embracing life for what it was: messy, unpredictable, and beautiful in its imperfection. And for the first time in years, Sophie felt free.